So, you know, we've had a number of different messages, a few different sessions talking about, you know, we talked about perfectionism, for example, and we've talked about sovereignty, we've talked about kind of these values and functional elements of how we work. And the thing that I was given to talk about tonight was something that was a lot more, it was very specific in the sense that it's almost like it's an aspect that every single one of us has to some extent. It's just whether that extent is that it's a small thing in the back of our minds that's fed by culture or expectations, or if it's like a whole separate personality which almost like speaks to us as a person who's berating us, like some form of some form of like self-maintained drill sergeant, coach, or mother in the background to just like constantly undercut us and curtail us. And the biggest thing that I'm talking about here tonight is the kind of that part of each of us that's self-critical. For purposes of the message, I'll refer to it as the critic. And basically what it is it's that part that each of us has that effectively acts against us. It's that dark side of our personality that stands in and effectively punishes us emotionally and psychologically whenever we fail, whenever we don't meet our own expectations for ourselves for the day, when we don't do what we're supposed to, when we do something bad, when we do something that's not actually very bad. You know, there's a litany of different things that come up and this thing can affect and almost use against us as a means of attack. And the thing of it is like, this is always this is a very fascinating topic to try to kind of address, because one of the problems with it is number one, there's a value to any kind of convicting element, especially in Christianity, to have something in us that effectively says, you know, hey, this is wrong. That's extremely important for us, not only as Christians, but any form of person as we're in a culture and we develop. It's kind of like that moral center, but sometimes that gets corrupted by different aspects of our culture, of our society, of the way that we're taught by our parents to live. And it can become twisted to the point where suddenly we're hurting ourselves over things that genuinely do not matter. You know, does it matter that when you woke up today you forgot to wear makeup? And does it really require you some like quiet level of self-abuse? When you didn't get everything that you set out to do today done, does it really require you to turn around and like, you know, punish yourself for that? And the truth is that for some people, that's where they take this. That's where it goes. In fact, for a lot of people, that's where it goes. And there are a couple different like avenues to kind of go down with this subject, but we'll start with just talking about the critic itself. Just to kind of define it and kind of flesh it out. And like I said, there is a spectrum for how much it affects us, but the truth is that the greatest, we'll talk about kind of like the greater elements of it, because the truth is I think that most people in this group, but also in our society at large, are subject to it. In that it's almost like we always have this little voice in the back of our heads that tells us that we're not doing a good enough job. A lot of millennials, for example, will talk about how, they look at kind of the American dream, as it were, as it's projected. The idea that by a certain age and time, you're supposed to have your life set up with so many different things. And they get really embittered about that because the other, like, older generations are looking down and saying, well, why don't you have that? I have that. And as a result of that, there's kind of this cultural expectation that looms over our shoulders that says that we're supposed to achieve this. And because we feel that pressure, we sit in a state of unrest. And there's something in us that's able to criticize us, that even though we're doing well in life in different ways, especially given kind of our circumstance and the environment that we have economically, sociologically, and so on, it still like tears us down. And like, just to be specific, when we talk about this in Christianity, it goes even further because there's such a strong presence for this. We talk about legalism all the time in the church. We talk about the abusiveness, about the weight, the judgment of people or of the church itself as an entity, and just how like suffocating that is. And every single person in the church, it feels like they're weighed down by this whole concept, because there's so many things that you're supposed to be doing as a follower of Jesus. And some of those are valid, and then there are a lot of them that are not. We talked a while ago about traditions of men and how there were a lot of things that the church preaches that aren't actually in the Bible. They preach things that they claim are from Scripture. They claim that they're from Jesus himself, and that's not actually true. And there are a lot of like kind of prevailing mentalities that are carried and projected and moved forward. And all of this creates a very fertile breeding ground for this critic to function off of. It can really like grow and develop and overtake us emotionally and mentally. And see, the thing of it is that the biggest frustration with talking about this, it, in a lot of ways, we kind of, whatchamacallit, in a lot of ways, we tend to like look at it as what can be a motivating factor. There are a lot of people who value this side of themselves, or justify it is a better way to put it, because we look at it as, okay, this is that harsh voice that pushes me forward and motivates me to do better. I need somebody to effectively kick me in the ass in order to go do things and to kick ass. I've heard people say this line. And so there are a lot, or, this is the kind of like very brutal side of me that makes me be better than I am, than I would be otherwise. So it can look a lot of different ways. It can either look like, this screaming judgmental thing, or feel like, is another way to put it. The critic can either be this judgmental, screaming thing that pushes and hurts and undercuts every little thing that you do, or it can be like this motivational thing that will abuse you until you do what you need to be doing. But see, the machinations for how it works are that it functions purely off of shame, guilt, harm, self-disgust. There are a lot of different things that it utilizes in order to push us forward, in order to make us do better, that aren't actually good things. When I was in basic training, the drill sergeants would push people so hard in order to get them moving. They'd yell at you. If you did anything, like if you stood up to one, they would surround you and just scream at you until you either capitulated or, in some cases, stood there and just ignored them until they got tired of yelling at you and told you to go back into line. But the thing of it was that the psychology behind that was that they did this in order to freak you out and in order to try to get you moving in the way that you needed to moving to kind of create an atmosphere of pressure and anxiety. And with that established, they could then manipulate your behavior and create a soldier out of you, or like mentally break you, which happened to a lot of guys while I was there. I had a lot of guys around me that had mental breakdowns, and then they had to be shipped off to be taken care of by government facilities to take care of people who were mentally damaged, or they got sent home because they were untrainable, like any of these options. So that's the thing, and and the truth is that it can look a lot of different ways, in the sense that it can be a small thing. Like, it can just be that small thing that effectively says, yeah, but you could do better. Yeah, but, you could have done this instead. And what that does is it quietly undercuts any kind of thing that you do achieve. At the same time, it can also be that screaming thing, where you don't achieve what you're supposed to do. Like, you get up, you set up your schedule, you try to hit everything on that list of things to do, and then you don't achieve one of them. And it's that thing that's just like, look at you. How pathetic are you? You couldn't even do everything on this short list. You're so disgusting. You're not even worthy to be an adult. Look at how old are you, and you're still not even doing that. It's such an easy thing. And, in Christianity, in the church, we talk about demons and like their effect on us and how they can do that stuff. And that's true, that's valid. These spirits do come at us in this way, but we also have to understand that there are some things that we carry ourselves. Just because you have a voice in the back of your head telling you that you're a fuck up.
Woo! Yeah. Preach it.
Doesn't mean that there's a demon there on your shoulder telling you that. Sometimes it's just you. It's just a part of you that has been adopted from either the expectations of society, the expectations of your parents, church, whatever. Whoever has had at any point in time the authority to dictate to you how you should live, it can become this quiet extra identity that permeates and effectively robs you of any opportunity to celebrate anything in your life. This kind of sadistic side of your person that we create value for because we think it pushes us, but in reality it just harms us. It's the same way that when you train an animal, there are two avenues with which you can train an animal: abuse or placation. And there are more than that, but these are the ones that get the fastest results. You either train them by giving them food and effectively gifting them for doing what they're supposed to do, or you beat them till they do what they're supposed to do. Just because they work doesn't mean that they're good. Okay? And this is one of those really, really important things for us as human beings that we need to constantly be looking at. Because we have this prevailing mindset that progress equals good. And the reality is that progress in and of itself is a neutral concept. It does not carry any moral anything. Just because you're moving forward doesn't mean that you're moving forward in the right direction. Just because you're achieving, you're accomplishing, you're doing stuff, it doesn't mean that you're going in a right or wrong direction. It just means you're going in a direction. Whether that ends up being right or wrong is defined by effectively the consequences or the rewards of that accomplishment, of that pursuit, of that whatever. And the truth of the matter is that when we've really developed that critic inside of us, you know, it doesn't matter what we land on, because it will rob us of any good anyways. I think one of the hardest things about it is like, you know, this is an abusive character trait, okay? No matter how we want to justify it, validate it, look at it, it's not good. It's not good to have a part of your personality that is almost separate and adversarial to the rest of your person. And as a result of it, like oftentimes we can't even get out of things like depression, anxiety, despair. Like these kinds of, when our world's falling down around us, the last thing we really need is somebody that's like putting daggers in us because we're not doing a good enough job or we're not gaining control of this. You know, there are too many occasions where we don't actually have control of what's happening. And it's a really hard thing for us to accept that, but it's also the truth. You know, we've been talking about that off and on for a while because, you know, life isn't fair. And that's part of life. Your efforts don't always make a difference. How good you do, how bad you do, doesn't matter. You could have fought your hardest and given everything that you had, and you'd still lose. Because at the end of the day, the deck was stacked against you. That's part of life. And it doesn't matter who you are or what you believe in. That is part of it. You know, even in Christianity, like a lot of Christians believe that, you know, when you get right with God and then you be a good Christian, and if you're a good enough boy or girl who follows all the laws right, you know, you'll be rewarded with a life that's without trial. And that's literally the opposite of what Jesus himself talks about. It's in John 16 when he specifically says, I don't promise you anything easy, I promise you trouble. Life will bring you difficulty. I don't know why we believe what we believe, but we do. Even though the counter to it is given by the person that we're claiming to like believe in. But there it is. And at the end of the day, when we talk about the critic, and to flesh it out completely, it's the quantum of our need for control. It's derived from this deep, deep sense of needing to get things right. It's a combination of perfectionism with a need for self-control and control, period. But also taking ourselves far too seriously. We put ourselves on a pedestal. It goes back to what we talked about with judgment and about how we needed to take ourselves off the judgment seat. Because for that third aspect of it, that's what it is. Like it's our place of godhood that sits over top of our lives. See, for as much as we can be like struck by lightning and die instantly, with no ability to do anything about it. Like, I've been. Lightning has been something that God's been talking to me about specifically because it's been kind of haunting me in a way. But it's this concept. The concept behind it is unfair. Categorically, it's not fair. Because just because you don't hear thunder doesn't mean you won't get struck by lightning. If the clouds are dark, there's an opportunity that it could just happen. Then the thunder comes after. And then, but you're gone, so it doesn't matter. The chances of getting struck by lightning are obscene, but at the same time, they're there. And when they happen, they happen. And there are too many people who have stories where they got struck and they didn't know it was coming. They had no ability to prepare. There was no opportunity to dodge or anything like that. They weren't playing the. They weren't carrying around a metal staff. They weren't doing anything. They were just walking on a golf course, and suddenly. And there's this thing with that. See, we don't, because of, that element of life exists. We can get struck down so easily. But we're so busy, we're so constantly obsessed on a subconscious level with controlling our environment, controlling our circumstance, controlling our place in society, or all these different facets of it. We heap all of that need to control on our own shoulders. And effectively what we do is we create in ourselves what is conceptually a god. I think it was last week talking about sovereignty when I made mention of the fact that in the old Hebrew language, the word Elohim was what was used to describe God or gods. And that word means the same. That word has multiple different meanings. God, demon, angel, judge, person of authority. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, it basically is there and exists to exemplify, to illustrate a being of authority. So, just as much as God is referred to as Elohai or Elohim in the Old Hebrew, they also refer to any judge as an Elohim. And in that particular regard, we ourselves, we basically put ourselves in that same bracket because we become the judges of our own lives. Even though we can be taken down so easily by something that we can't foresee or expect or defend against, we still place ourselves on that seat. And then as a result of that, that preoccupation with control and judgment, we think that we have the best way forward. We think we have the knowledge to do what's best for us. How often do we see people who presume to know what they need, and then they go get it, and it doesn't work? How many times do we see people in relationships who hold on to bad relationships or pursue bad relationships? I mean, we have one example who has come to this group many, many times who pursued a bad relationship despite having God himself tell her, don't do it. And she still went with it, and she's been dealing with the repercussions of that for like 10 years. At the end of the day, there's this major part of us that when we put ourselves in that position, that is all on us. We're taking on that mantle and saying, okay, I'm going to control this. I'm going to control my life. Well, that means that your lack of perception, your lack of judgment, your lack of wisdom is going to have a direct effect on you. And as you move forward trying to make that work, and your lack of knowledge is going to be another major thing. If I'm trying to fix my life, but I don't know how to live a life outside of a very linear thing that I've been taught by my parents and my situation, how exactly you're supposed to break free of a cycle when it's all you've lived in? If you have never known anything else, how do you break free of that with just your knowledge? And that's the thing. That's the point where we have to really consider and know what we're dropping and what we're up against. And we create in ourselves this kind of monster that, is ready to pounce on us the moment that we don't get it right. Or when we get it wrong, and then somebody points out the really simple solution, and then we just beat ourselves for not having seen it. It was so simple. How did I not see that? I'm such an idiot. So the critic that I'm referring to is the combination of these three elements, these three things: judgment, control, and the other one that I'm drawing a blank on. So, the other part of this is like, as I was started to say earlier, like one of the things that's always fascinating about this topic is the number of people who validate the existence of this kind of element of their personality. And that's kind of like, having fleshed this out, to go down another one of these avenues here is to talk about the value of it. And there's a lot of perceived value, because like I was saying earlier, we think it's that part of us that kicks us in the ass so we can go kick ass. And we feel like we need it. Now, the question that I would always have for people is, why do you need something abusive to get you to do what you already want to do? And I think that ends up being a question that's going to be very important for us when we look at this kind of thing. Because, a lot of us think it's just a part of us and it's normal. And that's probably true to some extent, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. But the biggest thing here is when we have to take a step back and look at it for what it is. And we look at it as being like a motivating factor. A lot of us use it for that. Or, our parents used it on us for that. And it kind of becomes adopted. And the thing that's really frustrating about that is, on the one hand, we go back to the side of it where we might not know any better. Like, all that we know is how to be critical, therefore we live in that and function in that. So we try to live our lives in accordance with dealing with it. But the other part of it comes down to where we value it and the danger of valuing this. Like I said, do you need something abusive to get you moving? If you know how to do a good thing, do you need somebody to whip you until you do that good thing? Sometimes, sure. But do you really want to if you're not going to move? Like, one of the things that always kind of gets me with it is there are a lot of people who stand back and say, I know I should do this thing, but I don't feel like going and doing it. Yet, the moment something that pops up that they want, they're up and out like a shot. Like, one of the hardest things for all of us, I think, is to acknowledge like this thing where what you want matters. And it doesn't just matter in the sense of like it being important to you as a person. It matters because it shows kind of where your heart and mind is. And you know, if I need somebody, if I need a subconscious piece of me to verbally abuse me until I get up to go like take care of something that I need to take care of, I probably don't want to take care of it. Like if I can't be motivated by a desire to do it, you know, that's clearly missing. And I'm lying to myself when I say that I want to go do this. Hey, I really want to get to your birthday party. I just can't. I can't get up. I'm just too tired. You know, I'm just too whatever. You know? And that's disqualifying any topic of people that are sick and like dying or anything like that. What I'm talking about though is the motivation side of it. Because there are too many people who they're not motivated to go do it. They just feel bad, or they feel caught up in something else, or they just don't care. They in actuality don't want to go to said birthday party, but they also don't want to confess the fact that they don't want to do it, because that sounds bad. It sounds like they don't care about their friend or whatever. And then, you know, that's cause for that self-critic to pop in there and like chastise them again. So the thing of it is that like we create an environment. If we can't be honest about what we really want, then we create an environment where we need something like this. And when we create an environment for something that is actually dangerous to us, that shows a level of sickness that's inside of us. Whether that's something that, and like I said before, that critic thing is going to be there no matter what. We all have it to some extent. It's just how big and how strong it is that has a value here. And in this particular instance that I'm kind of illustrating, we're creating a situation where we need that. But it's not different from, you know, needing some form of stimulant in order to get up. Like, we have the energy in ourselves, but, you know, we don't want to do it. So we find some way to like energize, and then eventually our bodies become dependent on it. This is the same thing, but it's a psychological part. Psychologically, we become dependent on this thing to beat us into moving forward. It's the psychological whip to motivate. So, to take a step back for a moment, there's a value to being honest with what you want to do and don't want to do. And like speaking of it in terms of like Christianity, God doesn't tell us. Like, one of the biggest things is that when we talk about God and choosing God, you have to want to choose him. Okay? Like, he doesn't accept obligatory love. Like, last week we talked about God's sovereignty and like him being a person in essence, and like how we have to understand, like we have to allot him personage in order to really understand him. And the thing of it is as a person, he's not interested in you beating yourself into loving him, or beating yourself into following him, or punishing yourself until you choose to do what he's asked you to do. None of us would do that either. Like, I don't think there's anybody in this group who would sit back and say like, yeah, you know, I'm perfectly fine with the fact that Jeremy forces himself to come hang out with me. Like, I know that he doesn't want to, but he chooses to. Not because he loves me or, wants to hang out with me or even likes me or anything, but because he beats himself till he does it because he knows he's supposed to.
It's a good friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's love.
Yeah, that's not God. That's literally so far from his character. I mean, when we talk about scriptures and we talk about you see the illustration in the Psalms of the way that people came honestly, and God asks people to come openly and honestly to him. Jesus says that you have to give your heart. Your heart is an organic part of your being, okay? It's not something that you can pretend, okay? It's not like, in the same way when we talk about like a physical element, if I cut off my hand and give it to somebody, I can't tell them that it's a foot. I can't tell them that it's something else, right? You can see it.
You also can't say it's not yours.
Right, it's not true.
Same.
Yeah, exactly. You can't say it's not yours because you've got a nub there. And that's the thing, is like, for us being physical beings that understand things on a physical level, I cut off my hand, I give it to Brian. I can't lie to him and tell him it's anything other than a hand, right? You can see it. You can feel it. It's uncomfortable, but it's in your hands. Well, the same is true for our hearts when we give them to God. Okay? Like, he sees through all of our BS. I'm not gonna cuss again when I can't trim the video or edit it out. But I guess I should probably like allot myself one swear word per message, just to keep it like away
That's
from
how
being,
many you can have.
just to keep it safe from the COPPA thing. Anyway.
Safety.
But that's the thing, is like, for God, when we give him our hearts, he sees the same thing, right? Like, he knows that we're lying to him when we say, hey, I want to give you my heart, and in reality, you don't want to do that. You really want to like keep it for yourself. Like, what you really want to do is hang back and continue doing life on your own accord, on your own way, in the ways that you see as best. You really want to maintain your own little direction and course, and that's what you want to do. And the truth is that the only reason why you're talking to God right now is because you want the safety to do that. And even though you're saying, hey, give me a direction, what you're really wanting is for him to leave you alone long enough to just do what you want to do. Or in some cases, like, you want him to just agree with you. There are a lot of different avenues with that, but the point is, God sees this stuff. He sees all the underlying stuff that's going on. And he sees through the stuff that you're trying to peddle to yourself. Going back to that hand analogy, I can convince myself that this is my foot that I'm giving away. It's definitely my foot. Arm has a nub. Everybody else is just like, that's a hand, dude. But I've convinced myself that it's a foot, and that is the truth.
Your best foot.
So, and I'll fight anybody who disagrees with me.
With your one hand.
One hand. There's bones in there. That's a good solid hit if you can swipe somebody with it.
Ouch.
It's also a smaller surface area than a fist, so it's gonna hurt more.
Right in the eye socket.
Anyway, the point is this, is that when this thing will actually cause us some significant problems, in that, number one, it creates in us a situation where we oblige ourselves into things. We punish ourselves, we whip ourselves, we do all these different things where we actually abuse ourselves into being better people or whatever. And the truth is that doesn't actually make you a better person. all that it really does is create an anxious environment inside of you that has you moving forward in such a way as maybe it's what the direction, it's what you're supposed to do, but it's not what you want to do. And see, the thing about Christ is we're not interested in what it is that you think you're supposed to do. He's interested in what you want to do. And ultimately, the thing with transformation, the reason why he talks about, becoming a new person is because a different person has different wants, different desires, different values. And that's effectively why we lay ourselves out before him. Because, one thing that we've talked about over the course of time throughout, years is, contrary to a lot of teachings, not everything is wrong with you. Okay? Like, just because just because you were born sick, in essence, it doesn't mean that all of you's bad. There's stuff that God created. There's stuff that God made for you, made in you, that he breathed into you. Last week we talked about, the sovereignty of the individual and the way that God breathed his essence into us. And as a result of that, we carry our own personal sovereignty. And in that regard, we're free of a lot of these different components, a lot of different things. We're not as subject to the environment or the world around us. We have the ability to say no, to step out and above and beyond and go these other places. And even though you can get struck down by nature, it doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that you can be forced into things by other people, You can step out, you can move forward, you can grow, because you're an entity in and of yourself. But part of aligning with God is, allowing that to be shifted, to be built upon. And that isn't something that you have to do for yourself, okay? And, the things that God has built into you that are already good, they're going to be things that he holds on to. When we talked about the offices, the spiritual offices, we talked about the way that a lot of these things are built into us. They're in our DNA. The heart cry of a person already exists. We don't know why we are the way we are. We just do it. My inclination is to try to create community. I don't know why, I just do it. It happens. Sometimes I don't see it coming. I've always had, though, a small group of people around me. Ever since I was a teenager, I would just magnetize people, and I didn't know why. They mattered, and I didn't know why. It just happened. It's the same way that another person might care for other people. They don't know why they do it. They just do. And these are elements of God's character that are built into each of us. Okay? So when we talk about, the need to die to ourselves and so on, that doesn't mean that God wants to destroy everything that you are and build everything up from new atoms. No, he's going to take what's bad and pull it away, what's broken, what's damaged, and some of it might not even be taken away. It might just be reassigned or redeveloped. Because sometimes we can be, twisted. It's not necessarily that it's a bad thing, it's that it's something that is good and has been tweaked by our upbringing or by darkness or by whatever. So, but it still stands that this critic is effectively our own little means of like trying to take control of that. That's something that is the work of the Holy Spirit. When, all throughout the Bible, what we run into is speaking, or where Jesus is speaking of the Holy Spirit being the thing that counsels us, that convicts our souls. You don't need to like judge yourself. In fact, in the Bible, there's stuff where it specifically talks about how you shouldn't judge yourself. One verse that I was given for tonight was out of 1 Corinthians 4, where Paul actually talks about how Paul talks about it, starting in verse 1. So then men ought to regard us as servants of Christ, and as those entrusted with the secret things of God. Now it is required that those who have been given a trust must prove faithful. I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait till the Lord comes. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of men's hearts. At that time, each will receive his praise from God. And then also in John 16, which I referenced earlier, Jesus talks about the Holy Spirit being the thing that brings conviction. The biggest thing that we run into is that this critic is a construct inside of us that tries to control. And in that, we try to make ourselves better, we try to do better, but it's always coming from our own abilities, our own perception, okay? And as a result of that, it can actually push us down the wrong direction, and it can actually even rob us of growth. One of the biggest and most destructive things about this is, we don't get to talk about the topic, or we don't talk about the topic of celebration enough, and about the need to celebrate where we've grown or where we've succeeded. As a man, as a woman, as a person in the church at any point in time, or as a person just living life at any point in time, there are a lot of things that we have to go through. And the idea that there's one size fits all, to categorize whether you're a failure or a success is delusional. But we do it. And as a result, if I have a good day where I get so many things done, I'll look back on it and say, I should be able to celebrate and say, wow, I had a good day. But instead, when this critic becomes something that's like really strong in us, oftentimes what you're served with is, man, I had a good day. Yeah, well, you didn't get this done. You didn't do this very well. You didn't actually achieve that either. Or my personal favorite is, yeah, you did good, but you're like, you're in your early 30s.
Yeah.
Shouldn't you already be achieving that kind of crap?
About time.
Like, shouldn't that be normal, easy stuff for you? Shouldn't you instead, be married with children and have a house? The thing of it is that this personality trait is something that will undercut us on a routine basis. And it's easy to manifest the idea that it's valid, that it's actually beneficial for us. And it's not. Because even when you get to places where you should be able to sit back and enjoy what you've got or what you've done, it's still going to rob you of it, because that's all it does. So with that, and with the recognition of that little fact, there's just a few questions that we need to ask ourselves. one, do we really need this? Well, I suppose the first question is, can you recognize it in yourself? This thing that does this to you. The second question is the first one I asked, which is, do you really need it? Do you feel that you need this in order to be a decent person, or to be a good person, or to be the person that you want to be? Third, why do you need something to hurt you to get you to do what you want to do? And then as a result of that comes the next question of, is that really what you want to do or be? And that ends up being the bigger question to grapple with. Like, at the end of the day, you know, we can look at all these different facets, but the core thing is, what do you want? Every follower of Jesus should be asking themselves this question. Every person should be asking themselves this question and answering it honestly. And I understand that sometimes we're not good at answering that honestly, because sometimes we don't know the answer. But we don't arrive at the answer by avoiding it, or by burying it under a collection of things that we feel we should do, or we think we should do. If I adopt a collection of values, it doesn't mean that they're what I want to do. And this isn't like a call to hedonism or anything like that. What it is a call to introspection. Like, we all know what we should be doing, okay? Especially, like, in terms of, like, Christianity and the church and whatnot, where God tells us, you know, I could quote the golden rule again and again and again, and it's not complicated. Jesus made it pretty simple. And if you don't want to do that, then the question of why is a really important thing. And it's something that we can invite God into to bring transformation, but we also have to give lease to Him to do that, instead of making it about ourselves grabbing the bull by the horns to do what we're supposed to be. Okay? You can't fake it till you make it. You can try. There's even like a psychological paper out there that's like validating it at this point, which is just baffling and amusing at the same time. But you can't, not really. You can create a habit that makes you accustomed to being a certain way or acting a certain way, but it will not actually change who you are. In fact, you might generate imposter syndrome in yourself as a result of doing it.
Imposter syndrome?
We'll talk about it later.
Okay.
Anyway. So, those are the questions to ask. Do you recognize the critic? Do you need the critic? Why do you feel you need it? And then what do you want? And that's what I got.